Greetings and welcome back to room 303 and freshman English, and we now turn in our MyPerspectives volume to page 216, 217 and following. We're working with Grayson Schaffer's The Value of a Sherpa Life. Now, let's work a little bit of background information on 217 really quickly. Located between Tibet and Nepal in southern Asia, Mount Everest is the tallest mountain in the world and one of the most dangerous to climb. Wow, look at the next line. More than 200 people have died attempting to reach the summit, including 17 Sherpa porters in 2014. Sherpas are a Nepalese ethnic group famous for their superior mountaineering skills. The companies that run expeditions up the mountain often employ Sherpas to guide climbers. Now, Grayson Schaffer, as we read on 216, he's a senior editor and writer at Outside Magazine. As a climber himself, he became disturbed by the media attention that was paid to Westerners who died while climbing Mount Everest, while the deaths of Sherpas were largely ignored. He's written extensively about the working conditions of Sherpas on Everest, of which obviously this will be an important essay. Now, write down the question that will be one of our focus here. Why is this text going to end up in our unit number 2 on survival? So let's go ahead and read now. It's not a very long reading, and then we'll annotate once we're finished.
Grayson Schaffer. On April 18th at about 6:30 a.m. local time, an avalanche swept down off the west shoulder of Everest and killed 16 climbers. To anybody who's familiar with Everest climbing, it should come as no surprise that all of the men were Sherpa porters. Sherpas are Everest's workforce, the literal backbone of the climbing industry there. The men who were struck were either carrying 80-pound loads to camps 1 and 2, or they were on their way back to base camp. Without the hard work of the Sherpa porters, it would be largely impossible for Americans and Europeans with slightly above average physiology and well above average disposable income to scale the world's tallest mountain. Increasingly, the pinnacle of adventure tourism, the summit of Everest, comes at too steep a cost. In the August 2013 issue, I wrote a story titled Disposable Man about the routinization of Sherpa deaths on Everest. Today's avalanche was the worst accident in the history of the mountain. Add to this the April 2nd death of Sherpa Mingma Tenzing, who was working for the Peak Freaks expedition, as well as at least a dozen serious injuries from the avalanche, and 2014 stands out as the bloodiest year in Everest history, all before most teams have even set foot on the mountain. Yes, something needs to be done. There's no question that guiding on Everest is ethically fraught, but shutting the industry down would anger the outfitters, clients, and most of all, the Sherpas. That last group would lose jobs that pay between $2,000 and $6,000 per season in a country where the median income is $540 per year. If, say, 1% of the American college-aged raft guides or ski instructors were dying on the job, the mortality rate of the Everest Sherpas, the guiding industry would vanish. But Himalayan climbing is understood to be extremely dangerous, and people who play the game still cling to its romantic roots in exploration, rather than its current status as recreational tourism. The answer isn't decreasing or ending the climbing business on Everest. The solution is increasing the value of a Sherpa life. Because right now, despite what anybody may feel in their heart, the industry clearly values life on a two-tiered basis. Westerners at the top, Sherpas at the bottom. Want to know what a Sherpa life is worth? You only need to review the numbers that I reported last year. Lower pay, lower standards for rescue insurance, lower payouts on accidental death coverage in general. And perhaps most significantly, the amount of time that Sherpas spend making laps through the deadly Khumbu icefall and up the Lhotse face, ferrying loads for predominantly Western expeditions, so that clients can arrive fresh and minimize their exposure to the hazards of the mountain. Several organizations, including the Juniper Fund and Alex Lowe Charitable Foundation, have made valiant efforts to teach Sherpas the latest climbing, rescue, and first aid skills via projects like the Khumbu Climbing School. But the hazards of the mountain remain. Last June, after I'd finished reporting Disposable Man, the Nepalese government announced that it would double the amount of insurance that high-altitude porters were required to carry to $11,000. But for about $200 per policy, at least one Kathmandu-based insurance company will cover Sherpas for $23,000. Even that is clearly insufficient to cover the loss. What's left instead is a patchwork of charity, in which some families find help from climbers to send their kids to school, and others don't. The change I'd most like to see would start at the very beginning of the tragedy, when outfitters describe what has happened to these men. In other words, that at this point, sound wrote. A typical blog post on an expedition website follows a predictable pattern, like this one from earlier this month. Our team is overwhelmed with sadness. Our prayers go out to his family at this extremely difficult time. Tea lights have been lit. We hang our heads in sorrow. But after sorrow should come an acknowledgement of a deep sense of responsibility that is tied into hiring somebody to do such a dangerous job, for an end result that's ultimately meaningless. In the press, largely as a result of a faulty translation to English, the deceased are always referred to as Sherpa guides. It's generally a misleading job title for the men, and one or two women, who each day lean into their pack straps and haul supplies up the mountain for paying clientele. As guides and Sherpas begin to wake up today in Nepal, they'll commit themselves to finding the remaining bodies. They'll waiter for hours, shovels in hand, under the same serac that killed their friends. The Buddhist tradition is strict about needing a body to cremate if the deceased is to find a speedy reincarnation. In the days to come, there will be 16 different puja funeral ceremonies, most of them in the small villages of the Khumbu Valley. In every village, there are already houses with missing men. Their photos, usually faded, smiling and standing on the summit of the world, are still hung for visitors to see. Now, there are 16 more.
Now let's pause for a moment and point out that the essay that we're looking at, notice it's on page 217. Do you see it at the top? It says argument. That is to say, this is an argumentative essay. And what is it that Grayson Schaffer is trying to argue? Well, of course, he's going to make the argument that the Sherpa's life should be considered of greater value than it normally is considered to be, especially by those of us in the West who will go to Everest and try to climb. Notice in paragraph number 1, he begins by just stating the tragedy. That is to say, 16 climbers. And this, notice the timeliness of this essay. Very recently, this has just happened. What is it that this workforce does carrying these 80-pound loads, right? They are, without the Sherpa, it would be almost impossible to climb. They're necessary, if you will, a necessary evil. And yet paragraph 2 says, it begins by saying that increasingly the pinnacle of adventure tourism comes at too steep of a cost, right? That is to say, it's we're losing too many of these. And if it was in America, that, for example, we were losing 1%, as paragraph 4 says, 1% of the American college-age raft guys and ski instructors were dying, that it would completely be off, right? But it's understood to be a very dangerous kind of activity. Of course, one of the big reasons why Sherpas do it is obviously the money they can make in a country where the income is averaged at $540 a year. They can make between $2,000 and $6,000 a year, which obviously is a big deal. The answer, he says, and of course this is the basis for his argumentative thesis, is not decreasing or ending the climbing business, but increasing the value of a Sherpa life. And there we are to the title, obviously, right? We have a two-tier kind of understanding where Westerners are at the top and Sherpas are at the bottom. And then paragraph 6 asks, what is a Sherpa's life worth? He says that he would like to see a change in paragraph 8, right? That is to say, taking responsibility for the actual hiring of somebody to do what he calls at the conclusion of paragraph 8, a meaningless, ultimately meaningless result in climbing Everest, that is, right? Also, of course, there's misunderstandings by virtue of language. That is to say, where they're called guides, when in fact, obviously, what they really are just hauling individuals by and large. And then as well, he points out that because of the Buddhist tradition of these Sherpas, that they have to find a body to cremate if the deceased is going to find a speedy reincarnation, one of our vocab words, that idea of returning back after one's death to live another life. In all, he will finish by saying that this is a tragedy, and 16 more Sherpas now have passed. Go ahead and jot down in 2A what for you is a major message here, the idea that we should value all lives, regardless of what it is that others might think of them in terms of value. Sherpas' lives are as well of value. The power of 2B observation, the rhetorical observation, is, notice again, this is an arguable thesis, that will begin with a tragic observation and end with the same observation, and then in between giving some statistics, some data to validate the point. But we should take more seriously the lives of these Sherpa. Finally, at 3A, well, how does this relate to other texts that we've read regarding survival and the importance of recognizing everyone is of importance and value, especially through the survival experience. And certainly climbing Everest is a survival experience, no question. Finally, at 3B, what are your thoughts about this? How do you respond personally to this? Would you be willing to do something really dangerous and risk somebody else's life if they volunteer to do it because you're paying them money? Or would you rather feel this is somewhat an uncomfortable situation for you? Well, there you go, an introduction to the value of a Sherpa's life. Thank you.